Hi there, this is Emily. Welcome to this course on the essentials of innovation management. Here at ITONICS, we see innovation management as an end-to-end process. Some definitions focus mainly on ideas and creativity. And it's not wrong, but it is incomplete. The full process of innovation management goes from strategic foresight to ideation to product launch and on to portfolio management. So it's not just about coming up with technology-related ideas. When done right, it's an iterative and repeatable process that typically starts with identifying opportunities in the world and then developing solutions to address those opportunities in the form of products and services. In this course, we'll unpack innovation management through 5 essential questions. Why do companies innovate in the first place? What do companies actually innovate? How do companies move from early exploration to execution? Why does innovation so often break down in capable organizations? And why do many companies use innovation operating systems to manage all of this? Let's start with why companies innovate. Most companies aim to stay competitive over time. They also want to grow. The challenge is that what brought a company into its current profitable position rarely guarantees that it will remain successful in the future. A company can be doing everything right and still slowly drift towards irrelevance simply because it's built for a world that is disappearing. Markets change, new technologies emerge, customer expectations shift, and as a result, companies need to adapt if they want to remain viable and competitive over time. And it's not just about financial performance. It also affects future employees, their well-being, and whether a company remains an attractive place to work. Innovation management helps companies deal with change in a deliberate way. It provides a structure to deal with uncertainty. Companies scan their environment, anticipate changes, and think about reasonable responses to such changes. The earlier they act on these changes, the better their chances of long-term success. Often, change forces companies to innovate so that they can survive. Sometimes, brave companies innovate because they want to shape the future themselves. So let's look at a few examples where innovation meant the difference between long-term success and gradual decline. Kodak dominated the photographic film market for most of the 20th century. At its peak in the 70s, Kodak commanded 90% of film sales in the United States. But when digital cameras became widely available in the 90s, Kodak struggled to adapt and began losing market share. The 119-year-old company filed for bankruptcy in January 2012. But here's a surprising fact. A young engineer, Steven Sasson, created the first handheld digital camera prototype at Kodak as early as 1975. He demonstrated it to Kodak executives, but the response was lukewarm. And it's understandable. Kodak was not a camera company. It was really a chemical and paper company. At the time, the digital camera business didn't look lucrative compared to Kodak's profits from film and print. Different parts of the organization held different views of the future. There was no shared perspective on innovation opportunities and risks. In that sense, Kodak didn't lack inventions, it lacked innovation management. It's worth highlighting that Kodak did not fail because it ignored digital technology. In fact, Kodak invested more than $2 billion into digital imaging throughout the 1990s. But if you compare Kodak's trajectory to its closest rival, Fujifilm, the difference becomes clearer. While Fujifilm gradually diversified its portfolio toward new sources of income, such as healthcare and LCD screens, Kodak largely tried to extend its existing film-based business into a digital world. Kodak assumed people would want to print digital photos at home. Instead, photography moved into smartphones and social feeds. So the problem for Kodak was not a lack of innovation activity, but a lack of alignment around where future value would come from. Another example is the success of Netflix and the decline of Blockbuster. At its peak, Blockbuster operated more than 9,000 stores worldwide. When Netflix's founder approached Blockbuster in 2000 with a proposal to work together, Blockbuster declined because they saw Netflix as a niche business with limited profit potential. Over time, however, Netflix's subscription model began to change customer expectations. Blockbuster did eventually recognize the threat and attempted to respond by investing in its own online platform. But this move conflicted with its existing profit model and faced internal resistance. Strategic initiatives were reversed, leadership changed, and valuable time was lost. By the time streaming became mainstream, Blockbuster could no longer adapt quickly enough. Like Kodak, it failed not because it lacked knowledge or resources, but because it could not align the organization around a necessary change in direction. These examples demonstrate why companies need to innovate proactively before changes in technology and customer expectations reshape the market. Let's now explore the next big question. What do companies actually innovate? You may have heard many different terms used to describe innovation, such as radical innovation, incremental innovation, disruptive innovation, continuous innovation, and more. These terms are often used interchangeably, which can blur a more practical question. What part of the business is actually being changed? From a management perspective, clarity matters. Innovation is about creating value, but the type of value a company creates depends on what it chooses to innovate. Understanding where to focus innovation efforts helps align expectations, allocate resources effectively, and increase the likelihood of success. Innovation can be categorized into three main areas. First, there's product innovation, which focuses on changing what a company offers by introducing new or improved products or services. In some cases, creating a new product opens up entirely new markets, such as smartphones, which enabled mobile app ecosystems. Then there's process innovation, which focuses on improving how work is done inside the organization by introducing new or improved processes to increase efficiency and productivity. Think, for example, of the Toyota production system, which revolutionized manufacturing by refocusing on lean production to eliminate waste, reduce costs, and improve quality. Finally, there's business model innovation, which involves changing how a company creates, delivers, and captures value. For example, by shifting from a one-time purchase model to a subscription model. Business model innovation might involve rethinking who the customer is, how products or services reach them, or how revenue is generated. Think of Amazon. That started out as an online bookstore and now makes most of its operating profit from renting out cloud servers on a pay-as-you-go model. Knowing which type of innovation to focus on is crucial for companies. Small, incremental improvements can certainly help, but they often won't provide the same level of return as more transformative innovations. And that's why companies need to balance making small, incremental improvements with exploring bigger, higher reward projects. To make this work, companies need to ask themselves where they can have the greatest impact. Are they improving existing products or services? Are they making their processes more efficient? Or are they looking to redefine their business model to capture value in new ways? When companies understand what to innovate, they can align their resources accordingly and invest in the most promising opportunities. Innovation must be directed toward changes that will lead to desired rewards. Companies need to identify where the biggest bottlenecks are and determine the best opportunities to create long-term value. In the end, successful innovation should lead to more value for customers and more return for the company. By knowing what to focus on, whether it's products, processes, or business models, companies can make smarter decisions about where to invest and where innovation is most likely to pay off. So far, we've talked about why companies innovate and what they choose to innovate. The next question is, how does innovation actually happen inside organizations? The short answer is, there is no single way to innovate. How companies innovate depends heavily on context. two factors in particular make a big difference. The first is the pace of change in the industry, called clock speed. In some industries, customer expectations shift quickly and new products appear every season. In others, change unfolds more slowly, sometimes over decades. Companies operating in fast-moving industries usually need to experiment more frequently and adapt more quickly than those in stable environments. The second factor is ambition. Companies that aim to defend their current position will innovate differently from companies that want to reshape their market or move into new spaces. Higher ambition typically means taking on more uncertainty and investing more deliberately in innovation. Regardless of industry or ambition, most companies follow a similar overall logic when they innovate. Innovation usually involves three connected phases. The first phase is exploration. This is where companies look for opportunities. At ITONICS, we call this the where to play phase in end-to-end innovation management. Companies try to understand what is changing in their environment and where new value could emerge. This involves scanning trends, technologies, markets, and competitors, and also learning from startups and new business models, as well as closely observing customer behavior to identify unmet needs or friction points. These insights are translated into opportunity spaces, challenges, or future scenarios. The goal is not to come up with solutions yet, but to decide where innovation efforts should focus. The second phase is about concept development. This is where companies explore how they could respond to the opportunity spaces they have identified. We call this the how to win phase. Teams take part in ideation and sketch out prototypes. They compare different concepts and consider alternative solutions. The focus here is on learning and making informed choices, not yet on scaling or implementation. Companies are trying to understand which approaches are most promising and align with the company's capabilities and strategy. The third phase is execution. Once a company has selected promising concepts, it needs to act on them. At ITONICS, we refer to this as the what to execute phase. Companies decide which ideas are strong enough to invest in and develop. They need to decide whether the solution will be built internally, acquired from others, or created together with partners. Some companies work with startups, run open innovation programs, invest through corporate venture capital, or create incubators and accelerators. You can think of these as different innovation execution engines to choose from. The clock speed of the industry and companies' ambition and the need to retain control over critical knowledge will determine whether it makes sense to apply one or multiple innovation engines. Strategic portfolio management is then how companies bring all of this together. It allows them to prioritize initiatives, balance risk and return, and decide where to invest and where not to. Project management roadmaps then translate these choices into a clear sequence over time, showing how products, services, or business models move from concept to market. So far, we've looked at why companies innovate, what they choose to innovate, and how innovation typically unfolds inside organizations. On paper, this logic is clear. Yet in practice, many companies struggle to turn innovation efforts into sustained results. You may be wondering why that is. Why do some organizations consistently move ideas forward while others get stuck? Why does innovation so often break down? So let's talk about why innovation is hard to manage in practice. While innovation management can sound straightforward in theory, real-world implementation is often disrupted by recurring barriers that slow down decisions, fragment efforts, and reduce impact. The first barrier is about knowledge. To innovate effectively, companies need a clear understanding of what is changing and where future value might emerge. This includes insights from internal experts, as well as signals from the market, customers, and competitors. Companies need to understand not only what is technically possible, but also whether there will be demand in the future for new solutions and whether customers will be willing to pay for them. In practice, this knowledge often exists, but it is scattered across teams, functions, and systems. Insights from foresight activities, customer research, or external scanning are not always shared, connected, or trusted. Different teams may work with different assumptions about what matters most, which makes it hard to build a shared view of priorities. As a result, decisions are delayed, opportunities are missed, and innovation efforts lose momentum. The second barrier relates to ability. Even when companies understand where opportunities lie, they still need the right skills, expertise, and capabilities to develop the solutions. Innovation often requires new technical knowledge, or different ways of working, or capabilities that go beyond what the organization is known for. In practice, this becomes a challenge when innovation demands skills that are scarce, unfamiliar, or distributed unevenly across the organization. Teams may lack experience with new technologies or new business models, and as a result, promising ideas can stall, not because they lack potential, but because the organization is just not yet equipped to execute them. And the third barrier relates to capacity. Even when companies have the right knowledge and capabilities, they still need the time and attention to apply them to innovation work. Innovation competes with day-to-day operations, and core business activities usually take priority. In practice, experts who are essential for innovation are often fully occupied with running the existing business. Innovation work is added on top of already full schedules, which means it gets postponed, slowed down, or deprioritized. As a result, initiatives lose momentum, progress becomes incremental, and long-term innovation efforts can gather dust. The fourth barrier relates to commitment. Innovation inevitably involves change. New solutions often require organizations to adjust existing processes, roles, incentives, or ways of working. Even when the strategic direction seems clear, committing to these changes can be difficult for teams and individuals. A common challenge is the lack of a clear mandate from senior leadership. Innovation is often talked about, but expectations are not always spelled out in concrete terms. Without clear ownership, priorities, and decision rights, teams may hesitate to act or struggle to justify their efforts when trade-offs arise. When leadership commitment is implicit rather than explicit, innovation initiatives can lose support when they become expensive or compete with short-term goals. As a result, promising initiatives stall, not because they lack merit, but because the organization is unable to commit. Taken together, these barriers explain why innovation is difficult to manage in practice. Overcoming them requires more than good intentions. It requires clarity, alignment, and consistency across the organization. So we've covered why companies innovate and what they choose to innovate, how innovation unfolds, and why it is often difficult to manage in practice. This brings us to the final question. Why do many organizations rely on an innovation operating system to manage all of this? There are many reasons why companies adopt an innovation operating system, but let's focus on the most important ones, drawing directly on what we've discussed throughout this course. First, companies use an innovation OS to manage innovation through an efficient digital process. Innovation generates large amounts of information from signals, ideas, projects, and decisions. Managing this work through an array of disconnected documents, spreadsheets, emails, and web clippings makes it difficult to maintain clarity and continuity. A shared digital platform helps structure information and makes it easily accessible to all relevant teams. Second, companies use an innovation OS to improve the quality of decision-making. The pace of change continues to increase, and organizations can no longer rely on intuition alone. They need to understand which forces matter, how they relate to their business, and where action is required. An innovation OS helps bring relevant insights together and enables teams to assess and compare options, leading to more informed decisions. Third, companies use an innovation OS to connect the dots in a single source of truth. Innovation work is often spread across different departments such as market research, R&D, engineering, product management, or strategy. And each of these teams contribute to the process of innovation, but they often operate with separate tools. When this information remains fragmented, it becomes difficult to see how signals turn into ideas, how ideas turn into projects, and where expertise and resources are actually available. And Innovation OS brings these steps together in a single source of truth, making it easier to identify bottlenecks, track the history of decisions, and manage innovation end to end. Fourth, companies use an Innovation OS to strengthen engagement and commitment across the organization. Innovation involves change, and change requires participation. When people understand strategic priorities, see how their work contributes, and have a way to engage with new possibilities, they are more likely to get involved. That brings us to the end of this course on the essentials of innovation management. We've explored why companies innovate, what they choose to innovate, how innovation unfolds inside organizations, and why it can be difficult to manage in practice. You've also seen why many organizations rely on an innovation operating system to bring structure and clarity to these efforts. If you're curious about the benefits of our ITONICS Innovation OS, just book a demo. And as always, we encourage you to explore other ITONICS Academy courses and resources as you continue on your learning journey.